There must be some peculiar confluence of factors in French archaeology. I say this because we have more practical evidence of minting from within the borders of modern France than from most other places in the world. The most recent detailed experimental archaeology on die striking was published in France. The only significant cache of official dies to survive from the ancient world comes from Gaul, essentially France. In the 1st century AD, a Roman minting tradition seems to have collided with a local elite burial practice. One of those where you surround a high-ranking person with the paraphernalia of their life, and for a brief period, presumably until someone put a stop to it as a massive security risk, that meant dies from the mint were buried with people who had worked at the mint. There are also at least 2 pre-modern mint sites that have been excavated in the country, the most famous of which, and obviously in the context of my videos, the word famous has a rather specialised meaning only tangentially related to its normal usage, is the Mint of La Rochelle. The publication I will be working from is Pierre Mille and Florian Téreygeol's account of the excavation in the town square, the Place de Verdun, between 1994 and 1997. There are several volumes on the excavations in general, necessitated by the desire to install an underground car park. This specific volume, published in 2011, is dedicated exclusively to data on the minting site found on the southern side of the square. How do we know that this particular site was a mint? Well, there are archival documents and city maps which locate the mint, so obviously that helps. But there's also archaeological confirmation. It's worth saying there isn't much that is diagnostic for a pre-modern mint that uses die striking. Mints that cast tend to leave lots of specific detritus in the form of used moulds, but mints that die strike generally don't, because the dies are valuable and, as I mentioned, a security risk. How seriously do mints take that security risk? The answer is pretty seriously. There are several dies from the Royal Mint at the British Museum, and those dies have had the insides of the die drilled out before they were transferred to the British Museum, so that if you attempted to use them, they would break. That's how seriously even a modern mint takes transferring an actual die, even to a major cultural institution with significant security. For that reason, dies tend to be cleared out when a mint is abandoned. In some cases, we know that they're not even kept on site when not in use, and it's the end of an object's life that is recorded archaeologically. So a die is most likely to be found in places that the mint is not located. Likewise for coins. Coins are found all over the place, even if they are made at mints, so the presence of coins does not tell you there is a mint there. At La Rochelle, 98 coins were recorded by the excavators, and most of them were not made at La Rochelle. 13 of them weren't even made in France. Again, a mint is where a coin begins its life, but archaeologists record where that life ends. There are crucibles, furnaces, other things like that, because those are big and they don't pose any sort of security concern, so they tend to survive, or at least traces of them. Several layers of different metalworking were recorded at the site, but those things just indicate metalworking. They are not specific to the production of coinage. There is, however, a feature which is peculiar to die striking mints, and that is the preparation of blanks. The process of turning raw metal into a piece that is the right size, shape and purity to be struck as a coin. Blanks, French publications tend to prefer the term flan, are not useful in themselves. They are a step in the process from metal to coin, and so if you find them, and the excavators at La Rochelle found more than 200 pieces of detritus associated with the manufacture of copper and base silver blanks, then you've probably found a mint. The different pieces come in a variety of different types and shapes, referred to in the publication as lame, carreau, detritus. I'll refer to them as strips, squares, because the coins themselves are round, and chisels, which are small offcuts you get when cutting a square shape into a round one. And based on those pieces and some experimental work, the excavators reconstructed a model how the process of blank preparation worked at this mint. The mint at La Rochelle seems to have operated from the 14th century until it closed in about 1689, and therefore about 400 years of actual operation. And those were 400 very interesting years in the development of minting technology. It's the moment at which European mints began to mechanize. So the idea that there was ever a single process at La Rochelle of how things were made is, of course, an abstraction, but it's a very useful abstraction in this context. The reason it's useful is because we rarely get this detail from textual sources. For example, the 16th century Indian text, the Ain-i Akbari, has this to say about the Zarab. The Zarab was the worker who made blanks. He cuts off the gold, silver and copper ingots as exactly as he can, round pieces of the size of coined money. Which isn't a very helpful statement. It doesn't really tell us much more than that the Zarab was responsible for turning metal into blanks. But intriguingly, the Ain-i Akbari tells us that the Zarab is paid 10 times as much for this job as the people actually striking the coins, which, since there's no reason to think they're paying for skill, implies it's 10 times as intensive in terms of manpower. That is also what the reconstruction at La Rochelle suggests. Based on the reconstruction in the report, this is how the job was done. The mint will have begun with purified copper and purified silver. It would combine those to make an alloy of a specific fineness, probably on site. A variety of ceramic containers for melting or working mixtures of metal were found in the dig. That would then be cast into a long, narrow ingot, maybe 5 to 10 centimetres. The ingot would be worked with hammer and heat into a strip of metal of roughly the width and thickness of the final coins. Those are the strips that were found at the site. That strip would then be cut into squares by hand. Those squares would be trimmed to arrive at a round blank of the right size and shape to make a coin flan. But that's not the end of the process. The round blanks were then stacked in small groups and hammered again to ensure they presented a flat surface to the die, and then placed in a corrosive mixture to selectively remove copper from the surface. This surface enrichment would make the coin look more silver than it really was. And after all that, the last step of which probably took a few weeks, the blanks would be ready to be struck. I've already hinted that La Rochelle may not be very representative. It sort of matches some depictions and descriptions, but not exact, and a lot of numismatists suspect that cutting is something you can only really do if you have quite thin coins. Medieval European coins are thin. It's generally assumed that thicker coins, as you find with most ancient coins, were cast. I've heard suggestions that Mughal blanks might have been made with a rod using a chisel, but again, that's something you can't really know unless you're fortunate enough to have a site like La Rochelle to work from. Unfortunately, mint sites are rare, and even when they are found, they are rarely as informative as this, because subsequent use clears out the evidence. The buildings that housed the mints of Athens and Rome survive, but any evidence of the work has long since gone. In this case, the site was in continuous use as a mint for several centuries, and the construction of the town square sealed in the detritus before it could be repurposed. So while La Rochelle is not representative, it is interesting as a specific example, and specific examples help us to critically examine our assumptions. For example, one colleague who has had experience of experimental archaeology working with medieval dies suggested to me that it would be much faster to flatten the blanks with a single hammer blow individually. To them it seemed cumbersome to stack and presumably pincer or wrap the stack in order to flatten them as a group. And I can't really disagree. That does seem cumbersome. But the fact is that the excavators found traces of hammering on some blanks, but not on all of the blanks, and the only way they could explain it was that the blanks were stacked to be flattened. All of the alternative explanations I can think of are a bit of a stretch. And I suspect mints just sometimes did things we would imagine are inefficient. On that topic, some final thought on space and time. The production of blanks took a lot of time. That's not a surprise. Numismatists tend to focus on striking because that is the thing that leaves traces. That is what die studies are telling us about. But we've always known from textual sources that striking is a very small part of the work. As the Ain-i Akbari suggests, maybe just 10%. Medieval artistic depictions, like this famous one from the White King, a set of 236 illustrations depicting the reign and kingdom of Maximilian I, show minting schematically. They show each of the processes, but not the space or time that they took up. Here we see the preparation of sheet metal, the cutting of blanks, and the striking. We also see the refining of the metal and the operation of the exchange at the back. That is a process some mints definitely engaged in. In the last episode I talked about English mints, and for a time those operated as both small-scale exchanges and production centres. People would bring metal, or old coin, and receive new ones. But as this discussion suggests, they probably didn't receive the same metal back, because making the blanks would have been cumbersome. Presumably those mints had a float, an existing stock of coins from which they exchanged and subsequently replenished using the metal they had just received. That does not seem to be how it worked at La Rochelle. We have documentary evidence for the mint. This was a royal mint. It seems to have taken central orders for coinage, and I suspect, contrary to the woodcut, the administration was not in the building. This was probably just the manufacturing. Nor do I think that it was all simultaneous. This is phase 4 of the excavated mint, which is what it looked like in the early 16th century. That's the period of the Ain-i Akbari and of the woodcut I've just shown you. It is divided into 3 parts. The western section was probably not used for work, and detritus suggests hot metal working happened in the larger space and cold working, such as cutting, hammering and striking, in the smaller space at the south. Physical separation was probably a practical issue, one ignored for artistic conveniences in depictions. And as we've just got discussing, to maintain a constant process, we'd have to assume 10 to 20 staff preparing blanks to feed a single anvil and a whole team running furnaces. And that is a lot to fit in to a 20 by 20 metre building, which is actually quite large by the standards of a lot of pre-modern mints. It would make far more sense archaeologically to have a much smaller staff sporadically doing different parts of the process. A few days preparing blanks, then half a day on striking, perhaps fire up the furnaces a few times a week. Anyway, enough for today. That is the Mint at La Rochelle, probably one of the most important archaeological sites for understanding pre-modern coinage and the process that was used to make it. It's a fascinating publication and one that should be on the shelf of anyone interested in how coins were made before the introduction of machinery.